Hello and welcome to the fourth installment of the Women of Color Coping Circle. Today's topic is on uncharted territory, grieving the uncertain and unknown. I'm Jen Martinez, pronouns they, them. I'm a doctoral intern at the Counseling Center as well as a full-time counselor. And I also want to highlight Dr. Whitney Hobson, who is also pronounced she, her. She's also a full-time counselor and staff psychologist at the Counseling Center who helped us in developing both this presentation and the other webinars in this series.
Hello, my name is Ishita Arora, pronounced she, her, hers. I'm a doctoral extern and a part-time counselor at Counseling Center and very excited for this final and fourth installment of the Women of Color Coping Circle webinar.
And so before we get started, just to give us a sense of what the scope of this will be, we're really hoping that this is an opportunity for you to reflect on your own experiences as well as receive resources. And, with the caveat that this and other webinars in the series aren't intended to be substitutes for psychotherapy. But if you are interested in receiving services, or you know someone who's a student at UMBC who would benefit from receiving support, you can contact us at the Counseling Center at 410-455-2472. And if you leave a message, a staff member will call you back and provide a consultation meeting. And if you're experiencing any symptoms of significant distress or afraid that you're going to put yourself or others at risk of physical harm, please contact 911 for emergency help. If you're on campus, you can call campus police at 455-5555 or go to the nearest emergency room. And so just to give you an idea of what to expect from today's webinar, we're going to start off with a quote that really sets the tone for this presentation. We're going to give some information related to this topic. And then as we're providing this information, we'll take some moments to stop and provide space to reflect. And so we'll be providing prompts and questions that might be helpful for you to use, either just thinking about them on your own, journaling, using them as part of a guided meditation, or maybe even using them as a conversation prompt with friends or other people that you would want to be having a discussion around this with. And then we'll also provide some skills and resources for coping, and then end it with an intention affirmation and additional resources for future support.
So just to set the tone and the mood of the current uh, topic of this presentation, um, H. Havelock Ellis said that all the art of living lies in a fine mingling of letting go and holding on. And in the current circumstances of we living in a global pandemic and all of the conditions that are happening in the society, which are really testing our patience and our tolerance, it's important that we understand that it's okay to grieve and we should give ourselves that permission to grieve as much as we need, while also understanding that there might be certain battles worth fighting for. And it's fine to be holding on to those battles and working towards them and fighting for them. But then there are some other things that we might be able to have to let go. So understanding where that balance lies for us is very important for the process, and it's also very important just for our emotional well-being on a daily basis. So, just starting with the content of the current presentation, what is it that is we've been feeling since March, since the WHO declared the global pandemic of coronavirus that we are all living under? this feeling that sometimes we are not able to articulate, that we are not able to understand. This feeling of discomfort is actually more or less a feeling of grief. And this is a feeling of collective grief, a feeling of collective trauma and collective which there are so many emotions that we are feeling on a day-to-day basis, and they come in waves and they go away and they come back again. And we are grieving because there has been a loss of normalcy for us. There has been so many changes all of a sudden, and we have had to adapt to them without any warning, um, and just build our new lives and build our new normals from scratch. And those changes have happened on a micro level and a macro level. So we have lost so much and we are rebuilding so much on different levels of our lives, of our personal life, of our professional life. There's also this huge fear of what will happen post COVID, or what will the second wave of COVID bring, and how our society is going to deal with the consequences that COVID is going to leave us with. And these consequences would appear themselves in the way of mental health crisis, the lack of jobs, the unemployment, the economic toll, how it's going to really impact the economics of how human beings function and how our society is so dependent on each other. So that uncertainty about about our future, about our jobs, about what's going to happen in the future is something that we are all grieving together as a society, as a world. Another grief that we're all facing is the kind of connection we used to have pre-corona and how that has changed right now, and what traits of that connection will we be able to still retain, and what new connection will we be rebuilding post coronavirus. So it used to be so easy to go to concerts, to go to restaurants, to go for a walk, to go hug friends, and we didn't have to think twice. But now, just stepping out of the house takes me personally 20 minutes, getting the whole thing ready, getting my gloves on, the mask, just looking at everything that's going on. And yeah, when I walk and I don't see other people replying to my smiles, I understand that I'm wearing a mask and they can't really see my smile. And that's just a new form of connection of how do we convey our smiles through maybe our verbal gestures or our eyes, and new forms of connection of being physically distanced from people that we love but still being socially connected to them. And in the first 3 months, there had been so many Zoom meetings and Zoom hangouts, but we have been seeing that people are burnt out of Zoom meetings as well. So, what are some of the other ways that we can stay connected with each other? Maybe doing a socially distanced picnic, or taking time for ourselves, and also spending some self connection time before we again jump onto the wagon of being connected with other people in our lives. So that concept of connection looks very different now than it looked before, and it will look very different in the future than it looks now. Some of this grief is something that we are anticipating that is not really happening right now, but we are trying to imagine the future and trying to see what will happen in the future and how do we adapt and prepare ourselves for that grief that will happen in the future. For example, some of us might be worried about the family members in our lives, our family members who are vulnerable population, to whom coronavirus might affect far more, to whom economic hardship might affect far more than it's affecting us, and how is it going to play out in their lives? How is it going to affect their well-being? So we might anticipate some of that grief, and our mind might keep on going in the future. Those summer plans we have had for ourselves, that internship I wanted to do, that time that I wanted to graduate, that birthday party I wanted to be a part in, all of that is not really happening the way we expect. And it's completely fine to know that this is not the normal that we are supposed to or we are used to living in, and it's okay to grieve. It's also very important that we understand that the future is uncertain. It's so difficult to plan these days. I can't really plan for next week what's going to happen. I have no idea. And planning for the next year, planning for a job, planning for a personal relationship, planning for having a family it's very difficult to plan all those things, and we might be leaving the certainty that the pre-corona times had in it. We don't have that certainty anymore. We also are feeling this collective loss of our general safety, our physical safety, our emotional safety, and uh, for many of us, that safety was real, and for many of us, that safety was at least a hopeful future for us. But now we don't have that hopeful safety as a future also, and it's okay to grieve the fact that we don't feel as safe anymore as we used to in the past. But it's also very important that we understand that their grief at some level is healthy. Anticipatory grief at some level is healthy because it might help us stay prepared for the future, be mentally prepared, and plan accordingly. But in some other ways, it could really hamper our day-to-day living, in which we are just thinking too much ahead in the future and we are not able to enjoy the little moments right now in our lives. So understanding what amount of anticipatory grief is healthy for us right now and what is not, and then finding that balance where it lies for us. So, stages of grief, most of us must be aware with the stages of grief, but it's important that we reframe the stages of grief according to current circumstances in which we are grieving our normalcy, we are grieving our certainty, we are grieving our safety. And it's important that we understand that these stages of grief are non-linear. It's not that I would very, in a systematic, manualized way, go from denial to anger to bargaining to sadness, acceptance, and then meaning. Sometimes I feel that I am in multiple stages at once. Sometimes I am both in denial and anger and sadness at the same time. And sometimes I have crossed all of these stages and I have accepted, but then there's something else that triggers my grief, and I can go back into denial and I can go back into sadness. So, stages of grief are just for providing us a framework, but it might look different for different people. So, when we talk about the first stage of grief, it's mostly denial that we felt early on in March, and might some of us might be feeling right now also, in which we feel that the virus is not going to affect us. People were not wearing masks, they were not really following CDC guidelines, people were still going on beaches and saying that this is their right to do whatever they want, no matter what happens. That kind of situation is something called denial, in which we want to deny the fact that it has any power over us. The second stage of grief is anger, in which we are like, oh my God, the government is making me stay at home and it's taking away my normal life. This is not acceptable, and I'm angry and I'm going to protest against that particular aspect of my freedom that has been taken away from me. But also understanding that that was just a way for us to cope, and it's not really healthy to stay in that stage for a long time without accepting the reality of the situation. The third stage of grief is bargaining, in which we say, okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, will everything be better? Okay, I will social distance for 2 weeks. And that's how it started. People said, I'll social distance for 2 weeks and things will be fine. And they said, okay, I'll social distance for 2 months and then things will be fine. Summer will be here. And we were trying to find out ways in which we could make those 2 months, picking up hobbies that we've always wanted to do, but we never did. And we said, this is just 2 months, we can pass them. But it's been 3.5 months now, and we are still there where we started, or we are actually at a worse stage right now. So right now is something that we would want to do is we'd feel sad because we don't know when it's going to end. That's where the fourth stage of grief, sadness, comes into the picture. We have bargained, we have been angry, we have been in denial, and now we know it's been 3.5 months. I still can't see my friends. I still haven't hugged my mom. I still haven't been able to travel for summer. I still am not collecting that data that I wanted to collect for my research. I still can't go to office and have clear boundaries between my workplace and my home. There's so many things that are the way they were 3.5 months ago, and it's okay to feel sad about that. The fifth stage is acceptance. Acceptance when you realize that it's been 3.5, 4 months, the whole world is experiencing it, and this is happening for real. And now I have to figure out how to adjust to this new reality and how to proceed with this. knowing that this is not going to stop anytime soon and it might take us some time to have a vaccine and for everyone to be vaccinated. So finding that control and acceptance is very important. Till the time we have a firm solution for everyone in which we can go back to the way we were living before, what is it that I can do right now? What is it that's in my control? In my control, what I can do is I can wash my hands every time I touch something that's outside of my household. I can wear a mask every time I go outside. I can keep a safe distance and meet family and friends at 6 feet apart. I can learn how to work virtually. I can provide support to other people in my community. I can still be a part of protests and be at 6 feet distance. I can donate to Black Lives Matter and other important organizations that I feel align with my values. So, what are some of the things that are in my control that I can do? That's a form of acceptance. And the sixth is meaning making, finding our silver lining in the storm. And it's far more difficult doing than saying. And it's sometimes we are not able to find the silver lining, not in this moment, but maybe in the future, or maybe in hindsight when we think about things retrospectively. But sometimes there is a silver lining. We see things in the long term perspective. And when we come to that stage, it brings us some contentment and some calm. But it's also okay when we come to that stage, we might go back to sadness again. That's how the whole process is very non-linear. So, with all of this information about this feeling of grief that we're all feeling, the grief that's happening right now, and the grief that we are imagining that will happen in future, and what does different stages of grief look like for us, I would just want to pause here for a moment and give you some time to reflect and think which stage of grief you're currently finding yourself in. Is it denial? Are we still denying that, the economy is going down, but the world is opening up. So maybe things are in control, or maybe they're not. Which stage of grief are we in right now? And how are we coping with this experience? What are our ways of coping? These coping strategies could look different for us in different times and could look different for us during different phases of grief. Sometimes all I want to do is just sit and watch TV and eat ice cream. But the next morning, I might want to go for a walk. So, what are those different ways that we are coping with our grief? Are we isolating ourselves? Are we being in touch with people? And how is this grief? How is this current situation affecting and impacting our day-to-day functioning? How is it impacting our relationships? Do they look different than before? How is it impacting our work? How is it impacting our self-care routine? How is it impacting our future planning? So if you want, you can take some time, pause here on the slide, think about these things for yourself, share with your family and friends, ask them about how it's impacting them. And while you take that time, we would like to go ahead and see what more information we have for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Isha. Again, feel free to pause at this moment to take more time to do that, to reflect on this. And then we'll be going forward at this moment. So you can come back and start at this time point. So Ishta talked, really in a really great way of all the different ways that we might be experiencing emotions right now, and what grief might be looking like, all the variations of that, and they can be, you know, m- as she mentioned, like anticipatory grief, grief about um, even the smallest things, or they can also be about the folks who we may have lost, in the midst of this pandemic. Um, and, that a big part of, what Ishta highlighted was this acceptance piece of, that a lot of coping and what might be causing a lot of distress is wishing that we could change um, what it is, what this is looking like, what we want it to be, um, and 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 so to be able to help maintain just some of our emotional resources in this moment, that acceptance might be a way of really kind of allowing us to um, kind of manage and kind of not cause more undue distress to ourselves. And when I'm saying acceptance, I'm not saying accepting or being okay that there's a pandemic going around, or that there are people who are actively making it harder for the public to be safe and engage in these guidelines, but really accepting the emotional experience that you're having in this moment, right? Validating your feelings, um, recognizing them without judging them. So we might be feeling sad and then feeling maybe guilty about feeling sad because we might think that other people have it worse, right? And that just kind of compounds the sadness, because it's not just sadness now, it's guilt. Versus if we're able to recognize that we're sad, and then um, giving myself some time to just feel that sadness, because that's real, that the grief is real, and allowing our feelings to flow without internalizing all of them um, as fact, right? Recognizing that if you're feeling sad and you let that in, you might be afraid that if you allow yourself to feel it, it's gonna, overcome you, and it's never gonna go away. But really recognizing that emotions come and go, that even in the word emotions, that emotions need motion, right? That for them to kind of through us and move through us, that we have to not try to control it and let us feel what we're feeling, and then go on to the next feeling. And then recognizing that feelings help us um, inform what we need in the moment, and whether that we need to be engaging in a behavior that's opposite to our automatic um, response. So, we may be feeling unbalanced and out of control, and so we can recognize that those are the emotions we're experiencing. So then what can we do something that then makes us feel balanced? And then we can create a plan, right, to do that. And it can be something small. Um, and and so all of these things, is it's not just, just let yourself feel and that will make everything better, but can you start moving? If you're looking at that diagram on the right, can we start moving from this fear zone um, that that is really just kind of keeping us contained in this negative, um, fearful place, to start thinking about what can we be learning about ourselves and what's important to us, and then where can we then use that to kind of get to this growth zone, right? That you're able to adapt and find the things that are important to you and engage in those, and really be present and help folks in the present moment, and think of how you can best be helpful to the people you love and care about, and to yourself. Because if we stay in that fear zone, right, then we're not able to take care of ourselves, and it gets in the way of being able to take care of others. And the other piece, that final stage of the stages of grief, is trying to find some meaning in what's happening, um, because I think, it's very easy, and I think what keeps us in that fear zone is just being assuming that things are terrible and nothing good's going to come out of this. And I think there's a lot of loss that, I definitely wish that people don't have to experience. And I think there's things happening that we're seeing that seem like they're leading to really profound discussions and systemic changes that we can be really engaging with and connecting with in this moment. And some of this is trying to create our new normal, right? Creating a structure that really feels like your own. Because I think right now it feels, maybe you were able to create some sort of structure when we first moved to remote work. And now with the summer, it's even more unstructured and we might be feeling even more restless. So, can we create a structure that really attends to our basic needs and processes and incorporating some coping skills and spaces into that structure? So, engaging in mindfulness breaks during the day and creating new rituals. So, whether that's with friends or that's with your own daily structure and rituals, one example is that my new ritual from now that I'm working from home is to make my bed every morning. It's not something I really had time for or prioritized when I was commuting. And now, like, that I have time to do that, it's something I really like. It gives some sort of comfort to myself, and I think, you know, trying to incorporate those little things can make us feel appreciative of this moment and what this moment can allow us to do, even though there's, in light of all of the things that we're not able to control um, or change. And on that note, also recognizing what isn't in our control, right? That a lot of our distress is is dwelling on things that we wish we could control, whether that's how the people around us that we love and care about or complete strangers, how they are behaving in response to this pandemic, whether that's not following social distancing rules or guidelines, not wearing masks. um, we can't, we want to control and feel certainty about our family's health, and we don't have that control. And but what can we do instead? We can attend to, that we are following the CDC guidelines and that we're having conversations to counter any misinformation that's going out with our family members too, to help make sure that they are doing things that are more in line with what will be better for their health. And to also reflect on what's important to you. What do you value? Who do you want to be? And how do you want to treat yourself and others during this time? Who when we look back on this moment, can we say that we were doing the things, we were reacting in ways that are in line with the person we want to be? There's a quote at the bottom of the slide that we are who we are becoming, that, you know, a single action doesn't define who we are as a person, but it's the things that we are continuously doing that define who we are and what's important to us. And so I want to take a moment at this point to stop and give you time to reflect on what might we want to take away from this experience. What are some of the things that are giving us some meaning, um, of why this is happening to us, and what we might be gaining from this? Because I know that there's a lot that we're losing, um, and so can we identify any things that we have gained? And similarly, what has this taught us about ourselves? What have we learned about ourselves and about our relationships and about what we need in our relationships? And then what has it taught us about society? And lastly, what has gotten in the way of creating a routine or a new normal? Are there thoughts that are our own thoughts getting in the way, like being self-critical, dwelling on what we wish we had before, or expecting that, maybe the way that we used to function should be the way that we're functioning now, or even continuing to be in denial. Maybe we're experiencing strong emotions that are getting in the way of us creating those routines. Maybe we're experiencing a lot of anxiety and sadness or frustration. Or maybe, after all this time, you might be feeling overwhelmed and hopeless, right? That there's still so much we don't know, and so much, and we don't know how long this is going to continue to go on. And there might be things in our own environment or that we're doing that's getting in the way of our routine, whether that's continuing to avoid, maybe our own emotions, not having a regular sleep and eat cycle. Maybe it's stuff in with family or work or housing or finances. I think recognizing what's getting in the way, and are there things that we can address or problem solve to help things feel a little bit like a new normal, so that it doesn't feel as effortful to get from day to day. And if you need a few more minutes to, reflect or write down your responses to these questions, I encourage you to pause at this moment. But we're going to go ahead and wrap um, things up.
With all of this information that we have shared thus far, we would like for you also to pause here and set an intention for yourself. Find out what of all of these skills and resources we shared, what is one thing from this particular workshop that you would like to incorporate into your daily life, and how are you going to go about and doing that? And again, you can pause here and you can think more about it. What is it that you would like to take, and how would you like to implement it?
Yeah, and I encourage you, if you want to go back through the slides and look through and see what might be the pieces that you want to work on to use this moment to identify that. Uh, but we want to wrap up by providing some resources that might be helpful. So, as we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, that this is the last in a series of the Women of Color Coping Circle webinar. So some of the other ones are virus racialization, inequity, and oppression, working from home wellness, and relationships revisited and reignited. And if you need any more information or want any more resources, we encourage you to go to the Counseling Center website at counseling.umbc.edu/webinar. And then you can also follow us on My UMBC, as well as on social media at UMBC Counseling on Facebook and on Instagram. And then in terms of the Counseling Center resources more broadly, we do have more webinars. So, we have some that are both synchronous and asynchronous. So um, please go to the website and see which ones are currently available. We also provide individual therapy. So even though the campus is currently remote, if you are enrolled as a student, you are eligible to receive services. Um, and so I encourage you, if you would want to get connected for individual therapy, to reach out to the Counseling Center. We also have crisis services and referral services available, that we have staff on hand who can provide those services. If you're, for referral services, in particular, if you're wanting to get connected to a counselor or a psychiatrist off campus, we do have resources to help with that and facilitate that. And then we have a number of resources online, again, on our counseling center website, on social media, and on my UMBC. And so thank you so much for sticking through, and I hope you found this really helpful. And if you do have any questions, to feel free to reach out to the counseling center.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us and for sticking through and for taking in all this information and giving yourself some time to grieve and giving yourself some time to reflect on different emotions that you might be feeling and how they might be affecting you. We hope some of this information is useful for you. For
Thank you so much.